Welcome to the BrainPal podcast. We're on a mission to improve the world through neuroscience. This is your host, Devin Rome, and today I'm with James Cavuto. James runs Neurotech Reports, which he founded in 2001 and has run for 21 years. He's earned a bachelor's degree in biomedical engineering from Case Western and a master's degree in human factors engineering from USC. Leading thinker and figure in the world of neurotech and biotech. And today I'm very excited to talk to him about the neurotech landscape, the latest news, and what you need to know about the neurotech industry. Okay, James, do you think that covers your background pretty well? And are you ready to get started?
Yeah, ready. Thanks for having me.
Yep, I'm excited for this. All right, so first let's do a brief walkthrough of your background. So you went to Case Western and USC. Can you share a little bit about what you studied and what you did there?
Yeah, so I was an undergraduate at Case Western Reserve University, and one of the first classes in the biomedical engineering degree program there. There were not many schools offering a full degree program in biomedical engineering when I was a high school senior. So I didn't have lots of choices. I grew up in Western New York and looked at a few schools, but really liked the program at Case Western, liked the fact that they had a dedicated staff, wasn't shared with other departments. They had some pretty leading edge people. And lo and behold, many years, or shall I say decades later, they're still top rated, one of the top rated undergraduate schools, and also, in graduate programs in biomedical engineering and in neural engineering in particular.
Very interesting. And then that led you to USC. Can you talk about the decision to go and get your master's?
Yeah, actually, that didn't leave. That was kind of a diversion. So when I graduated, the field was really new, and there were not a lot of job opportunities in biomedical engineering. Thought about graduate school, but also decided I wanted to get out of the cold and go to the West Coast. And I was involved in writing and editing. I was the editor of our college engineering and science magazine, which was called Engineering and Science Review. Gave me a little bit of experience. I don't want to say in journalism, but at least in writing and editing, and I enjoyed it. And did some science writing. After I graduated, there was a new magazine called Omni Magazine, and there was a magazine called Science 80 that was published, at least for a while, by the AAAS, the American Association for the Advancement of Science.
So, Ron, when was this, out of curiosity?
Oh boy, you're gonna force me to date myself here. This was 1979 when I graduated, 1980 time frame. So I moved out to the West Coast, got a job at Hughes Aircraft Company. I actually worked in aerospace because they were looking for any kind of engineer. They didn't care that I was a medical engineer, and they wanted an engineer who could write. So I really never worked a day as an engineer. I was classified as an engineer, member technical of the staff at Hughes, but they used me on publications, originally on doing proposals, and then I was able to get a job with corporate communications and was one of the editors of their external magazine, which was called Vectors. It was a science magazine. It was a lot of fun, and great job for a kid right out of school. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I got hired as the editor of a new magazine in the laser industry. So I worked in lasers and optics for a few years, got to meet some really interesting people, including the inventor of the first laser, Dr. Ted Mayman, who unfortunately passed away a few years ago, but also gave me an opportunity to see some of the new applications that lasers were bringing to the world, including in reprographics. And so that got me into the field of electronic publishing, laser printers, scanners, etc. I wrote a book in 1985 called Laser Write It. It was about the first Apple laser writer and the PostScript language, and decided, wow, this is interesting. So I quit my job and started a publication in the what we called the microcomputer publishing field. There was not a term yet called desktop publishing, but we were in that field. And
I want to clarify something both for myself and for the audience. So these were microcomputers, but those were the giant desktops with floppy disks and whatnot.
No, a microcomputer is what we called, what you'd now call a desktop PC,
Yes.
an Apple.
Yes.
The Mac had just come out in 84, 85. I actually had one of the first. Apple sent me one while I was working on the book. They also sent me one of the first, an alpha version of the laser writer, which was great to have. So I had an early Mac and an early laser writer. I also had an IBM PC, and we started a newsletter called Micro Publishing Report, and then we started a couple of magazines, and then we started the first digital photography magazine, and it was a fun field to be in, but ended up selling the publications in the nick of time, just before the .com crash. Not because I was smart and saw it coming, but because I was damn lucky. And when I sold the publications, I had a 5-year non-compete, and I was okay with that because I was ready to do something else. So I went back to Cleveland. I call it my Rip Van Winkle moment, because 20 years had passed since I had graduated from Case, and I wanted to see, wow, so what's been happening in the field since I left. And so my old professors were there, Tom Mortimer and Hunter Peckham, who were really two of the pioneers in neurotechnology and in neuroprosthetics. And they said, wow, a lot has happened. And so they hooked me up with Warren Grill, who was a new assistant professor there. He's now at Duke University. And he helped us get the new publication launched, the publication we called Neurotech Business Report. And that was in 2001. And now it's 21 years later, and we're still publishing that newsletter, as well as a new publication we launched last year called the Bioelectrics Business Report, which covers the related field of bioelectronic medicine. So we have 2 newsletters, and we also produce 2 conferences, one in the fall in San Francisco, one in the spring in New York, the Neurotech Leaders Forum in San Francisco, and the Bioelectronic Medicine Forum in New York in the spring. So we're a small organization, but it's been a fascinating time.
I see.
Covering the industry.
I see. It certainly looks like it. Now, one question I was going to ask, and I think you answered it pretty well. I was going to ask, so what made you decide on editing and writing over academia or maybe private research? It sounds like it was mainly 1, interest, and 2, probably a lot more opportunities for what you wanted to do, it sounds like.
Yeah, that's a good question. And, you got to remember sometimes when you're 21, 22-year-old, you're not always making the best decisions, but I was fascinated by the field of biomedical engineering, but it was new at the time. And I had thought about, okay, do I want to get into research and spend the rest of my life as a researcher? Or do I want to be a teacher, or do I want to just get into industry, or do I want to just be a writer, editor? And my feeling was I'd be happy to be a researcher and dedicate my life to research, but only if I could make a significant contribution. I didn't want to be one of those professors who, teaches and writes an occasional paper. I wanted to make a fundamental contribution to the field of neuroscience or neural engineering. And if I couldn't, then, there's lots of other stuff I could do. And so one of the other stuff
sounds like a bit of a yearning for leadership.
Move to the West Coast and get out of the snow. So I did that.
So it sounds like a bit of that, and also a yearning for leadership, right?
Oh, that's a very flattering way of looking at it. Like I say, mostly I wanted to do something more productive, but also, like I said, get out to the West Coast. So that kind of brought me there. And Hughes was good enough to send me out on an interview right after graduation and offered me a job. So
I see.
That's how that started.
I see. Very interesting. Now, this is a pretty big, so to speak, question, or a question that could have varied answers. How would you say, for people who might be majoring in biotech or fields related to biotech, how would you say the job market now compares to the job market for this same group back in the 70s and 80s?
Yeah, well, clearly the job market is much more expanded
Yeah.
because back then the field was so new, there really weren't any jobs. I mean, you could, I guess, go to graduate school and teach, or maybe you could get a job at a hospital. I didn't want to do that, but now there's all kinds of opportunities if you have a biomedical engineering degree, or even if you're, in a related field in the life sciences. Um, with or without a graduate degree. So definitely there's a lot of opportunities, but if I could offer advice, you didn't ask for it, but I tend to offer it anyway. Um, if you're in college and finishing up these days, and you've got a field that you're really interested in, and you want to pursue it, that's great. If you've got the opportunity to take a job with a company or with a research institution or with a graduate program that furthers your education and experience, and it's along the lines of what you want to do, great. But if not, if that perfect job doesn't materialize, or that perfect opportunity doesn't materialize, there's just so many other ways of getting into either a related field or getting into something completely different, and then finding your way back to what you're really interested many years later, as I did with my Rip Van Winkle experience.
Yes. Yes, that makes some sense. All right, now jumping back to you. So let's see, let me take a look at my notes here. So you ran these three magazines for about 13 years. You sold them to Cygnus. And then it looks like about 3 years after that, that's about, let's see, you sold it to Cygnus and you had a 5-year non-compete. And how long was it after that before you started Neurotech Reports, approximately?
It was almost, well, Cygnus offered me a 2-year contract
Mhm.
to stay on. After 1 year, they sent a vice president out to play golf with me. And on the 9th hole, they said, Jim, we don't need you to come in anymore. And I was astounded. I was like, what do you mean you don't need me?
Yeah,
And he said, why do you care? We're still going to pay you. You have a 2-year contract.
nice.
So I had a year. Yeah, it took me a while to realize, hey, maybe that's not such a bad thing. Okay, I guess I could do that, get paid and not do anything.
Yes, I see.
So
Not a bad gig.
yeah, so that's when I started to think about, okay, well, what's next? And traveled to a couple of conferences in the neurosciences, and went back to Cleveland and met my, former professors, and decided, wow, this is certainly not competitive, and kind of brings me full circle and they need a publication, so I'll go ahead and start it. So that's what I did.
I see. Now, the neurotech industry is quite interesting to me right now, but I'm curious what was going on in the early 2000s that really piqued your interest and made you want to say, okay, I'm going to dedicate a lot of my time and I
Yeah,
assume some money to doing this report, this website
great,
journal.
great question. What really piqued my interest back then um, was the tremendous advances in neuroprosthetics, and my alma mater, Case Western Reserve, was one of the leading places doing work in functional electrical stimulation, which is to say using neurotech devices, using neurostimulation to restore function, lost function. Cochlear implants were relatively new. They were FDA approved and on the market. Thousands of deaf people had them at the time, but of course, they kept getting better and better. But there was also work being done to restore function to paralyzed people. And when I was in Cleveland in 2000, 2001, there was a meeting of the International Functional Electrical Stimulation Society, IFES, in Cleveland at the time, which I got to go to. And there I met a woman named Jennifer French, and Jennifer French would later become, one of my partners in Neurotech Reports and co-author on a book, and helped on the publication. And she was the first woman to be implanted with an FES system. She had been paralyzed in a snowboarding accident just a couple of years prior to my meeting her, and she was there speaking as a user. And it was just a fascinating story, and I was amazed by the technology, and I was amazed by the perseverance of this young woman who decided, no, I'm not going to necessarily spend the rest of my life in a wheelchair, even though they told me that's what would happen. And she looked for clinical trials that she could participate in. And one was the FES Center at the Cleveland FES Center, which is affiliated with Case Western Reserve University. So she became the first woman to be implanted with this system and was able to stand up out of her wheelchair using electrodes implanted, in her muscles. And that was it was an impressive demonstration. So things like that were really motivating for me. The opportunity to restore people with disabilities, whether it's deafness or blindness or paralysis or debilitating diseases like Parkinson's disease or Alzheimer's disease or ALS, to be able to help people using new technology really caught my interest. And if there was a way that I could play a role and help spread the word and help put entrepreneurs and researchers together with funding organizations or with commercial firms or venture capital firms, then great. So we've tried to do that over the years, and it's been fulfilling.
I see. Covers it pretty well. Pretty interesting. Now, I remember when I first discovered Neurotech Reports myself. I was just Googling Neurotech and I found it. So it looks like you guys do a lot of things besides just publishing. Can you talk about some of the products and services one can find from Neurotech Reports?
Yeah, sure. So yeah, we started, with the newsletter, and then we also launched the conference, the Neurotech Leaders Forum, be our 22nd year this year. Anyone who's listening who wants to attend, it's November 7th and 8th in San Francisco. And of course, for people who are still dealing with COVID, well, we will have Zoom participation as well. But in addition to our conferences, we've done some market research. So we publish market research reports on a number of fields that are related to neurotechnology and bioelectronic medicine. And we've also begun a consulting practice for either vendors or startup firms or investors or government agencies or research institutions who want to delve more deeply or have specific market intelligence needs that we can help them with. So I have two wonderful colleagues, Jeremy Koff, who's in Los Angeles, and Jojo Platt, who's in San Francisco. And so the three of us, in addition to, helping on the newsletter and the conferences, help clients in their commercialization efforts for neurotechnology.
I see. Sounds pretty cool. And we can find that at neurotechreports.com, right?
Well, thanks for the plug. Yes, www.neurotechreports.com.
Okay, very cool. All right, so this leads well to the next question. So we covered this a little bit already, but let's talk about the neurotech industry now versus about when you founded it in 2001. We talked about the job market a bit already, but how would you say, how does the industry look different now compared to maybe back when you started?
Industry's changed dramatically over the 20 plus years we've been covering the market. Back then, there was one major player. It was Medtronic, and a couple of other players off to the side. A couple of other public companies. There was Cyberonics, which is relatively new, that had gone public out of Texas. There was Cochlear Limited, the Australian manufacturer of cochlear implants. And there were a few startup companies, but not a lot in between, right? So you had a small handful of major, publicly held medical device manufacturers, a growing number of startup companies looking for funding. And funding was pretty scarce in those early days, right? But not much in between those two. And these days, today, you have just a wide spectrum of public companies, medium-sized companies, and startup companies, as well as research institutions that have spun off a number of successful startups, both public and private research institutions. The L-Man Foundation in Los Angeles, for instance, or the FES Center at Case Western Reserve University spun off a number of startups in this space. So definitely it's a lot more mature, which means there's a lot more opportunities for people in the industry, a lot more opportunities for people who want to pursue research or graduate study in the field, or people who want to work in government as a regulator or in reimbursement. So it's really become a much more vibrant industry that's branched out in a number of ways, including non-healthcare applications. There's a growing contingent of consumer neurotech companies pursuing wellness or sports training applications, educational applications. So neurotech has definitely spread its roots in the time that we've been covering the field.
What is the FES, and what does FES stand for?
FES stands for Functional Electrical Stimulation.
Mm.
And the FES Center, the Cleveland FES Center, which is part of Case Western Reserve University, a group of investigators pursuing applications of neurotechnology for, treating paralysis, let's say, or treating other disorders, neurological disorders, and using a variety of techniques. So they've attracted some pretty talented researchers, investigators, professors at that particular institution.
I see. That sounds pretty exciting. So within the industry, are there any particularly interesting companies or maybe sub-markets within the industry that you are finding pretty exciting so far?
Well, there's a lot. Right now, one of the more, interesting segments of the industry is what we call BCI, or brain-computer interface, right? When Elon Musk got into the field, that attracted a lot of media attention. Of course, there were companies pursuing BCI years before Elon Musk got into the field, or Brian Johnson, who's another internet entrepreneur who decided, I want to get into neurotechnology. A company in Utah called BlackRock Neurotech has been pursuing applications. In fact, they're responsible for implanting brain-computer interfaces in human end users, more than any other firm has. A lot of the firms who are just starting have, maybe one or two or just a handful. And BlackRock has dozens over the years using their implanted device, brain device, which is a 10 by 10 array of microelectrodes that are implanted into the cerebral cortex. Paralyzed individuals are able to use this to control a prosthetic device or a robotic arm, or to control their wheelchair, or to turn the lights on. Where they're going with this is to integrate brain-computer interface with functional electrical stimulation, so that it's a more natural means of controlling that paralyzed arm or robotic leg, so that people who have disabilities like paralysis or amputations are able to have many of their functions restored.
I see. So it sounds like there are quite a few businesses and organizations working on some very meaningful and interesting projects within the space. All right, so the next question for you is, what would you say, or maybe where do you want Neurotech Reports to be about maybe 1 year from now, and about maybe 5 years from now? I don't need your exact plans, but where do you see Neurotech Reports going?
It's a great question, and a lot depends on where the industry is going, right? A lot will depend on to what extent consumer applications become the next big thing, right? And people have, made these claims. I've spent many years in the tech industry, right? In the computer industry, writing for computer publications, and we had our own. And the key driving force back then was the killer app. You got to find the
Mm.
killer app. And so with respect to consumer applications of neurotechnology, a lot of people think, well, we're still looking for that killer app, whatever that is. But I do think that field is going to grow, that there's going to be, applications of neurotechnology outside of healthcare applications that we don't know about today, that are going to emerge, that are going to spread like wildfire, just like those first, laser printers drove sales of desktop publishing software, right? Who had ever heard of Aldus PageMaker or Adobe Photoshop or
Mm.
Xerox Ventura Publisher? Well, the low-cost laser printer and the scanners, and graphic displays, those hardware functions created this whole new software industry. And I think something similar could happen on the consumer side here. We have new hardware, whether it's, implanted or whether it's non-invasive wearable devices, could very well lead to applications that nobody's thought of yet. And we'd certainly want to be around that. And if we can play a role in that, great. But also just continuing to do what we've done for the last 21, 22 years, which is, playing the role of the independent observer, right? The neutral player, reaching out to the industry to help address industry issues, but also to help the patient communities get realizable, viable solutions to their unmet medical needs.
I see. All right, and that leads well to one of my final questions. So a lot of people that follow me and people that are in my audience, they're either psychology or neuroscience or bio students or majors that are interested in the field. And I myself, I'm finishing up my neuroscience degree. So what would you say, what would you recommend for people who might want to work in the neurotech field? Maybe what they do in school or what they do outside of school in their own time if they want to get into the field?
Yeah, I've been blessed by being able to, be around, communicate with, interview some of the leading neuroscientists and neural engineers in our field, people that I think will be candidates for the Nobel Prize, people that have been or will be, inducted in the national academies, the National Academy of Medicine, the Academy of Engineering, the Academy of Science, some people who've been inducted into more than one or even all three. People like Helen Mayberg, who is a pioneer in the application of deep brain stimulation for treating depression. Been able to see for many years, through the ups and downs of that research track, but to see her perseverance and people like her who've worked not just at building devices to stimulate the brain, but in furthering our understanding of the neural circuitry involved in mood disorders or in what you might call a normal mood, if there is such a thing. So what I've discovered is that advances in science and advances in engineering go hand in hand here. Every time there's a new device, a new technology, maybe it's a robotic neurosurgical system, or maybe it's a new form of lead that can be, injected or implanted. or maybe it's some new machine learning algorithm or AI technique that can make sense of biomarkers or biosignals drawn from the body or drawn from the brain. Every time there's an advance like that, it helps basic scientists, right, further their understanding of what makes us tick, further our understanding of the brain and the nervous system. And conversely, as we learn more about the nervous system and how it works, neural engineers are able to use that knowledge to perfect or improve upon therapies that are out there. So to answer your question, you know, like I say, I've been blessed to have had the opportunity to be around people like that, people like Helen Mayberg, people like John Donahue, one of the pioneers of brain-computer interface technology, and many, many, other brilliant people like that, as well as entrepreneurs who built companies, using this technology. And so where do you meet people like that? Well, you attend conferences, you attend trade shows, you attend scientific meetings, and a lot of times, even if you're just a student, there's opportunities to do that. Even undergraduates can attend if there's one in your town or at your university that's coming up. Or if you're a graduate student, a lot of times there's an opportunity to tag along. Or maybe you get an opportunity to intern at one of the companies and spend some time in the booth at a trade show, or even just walk the floor and talk to people. Get a chance to rub shoulders with people. That's maybe not the scientific method.
Yes.
It's the human method. It's the way people's careers get advanced and people's interests in a particular subject get stimulated. So
Yes.
I've been able to do that over the years, and I think I guess that's one piece of advice I'd throw out to any of your viewers, your thousands of viewers who are watching your podcast or YouTube videos.
All right, very interesting. So it sounds like what the younger audience, the young scientists need to know is that you've got to open your mouth. You got to go places, go outside the classroom, outside your dorm or outside your apartment, and go talk and meet people. Right?
Absolutely.
So we're almost network, basically.
You might call it networking. You might.
Yep, because it's I wouldn't call it a business. Not all of it's a business, but it's a people's business, so to speak.
Yes.
To meet people. Okay. All right. I love that. Okay. So we've covered this a little bit. We're going to talk a little bit about your hero's journey. You're pretty far into your hero's journey, so to speak. What would you say you want your impact on the world to be?
Golly, I don't know. I would say that if someone along the line has said, hey, this publication or this conference that Jim helped put on, or, a personal meeting that I had with Jim helped me connect with someone meaningful, helped me accomplish something, right? If we could play a role in bringing together maybe a researcher and a commercial entity, or a researcher and an investor, if we can help put an end user who has unmet medical needs together with a new technology that addresses their disability, then I'd say that would be a nice legacy to have, to say that we played a role. We helped bring people together. We helped provide the information conduit so that they were able to do it.
All right. That sounds like a pretty awesome goal. Okay. All right. So wrap this up. James, where can we find you if you want to connect with you or do business with you or follow you?
Well, you can find us at our website, neurotechreports.com. If you're on LinkedIn, you can find me there, James Cavuto. And you can also find me on Twitter at Neurotech Writer. Please follow me on Twitter, and you'll get occasional tidbits of meaningful information, or sometimes, not so meaningful information, but maybe something funny. And certainly would love to have you attend one of our meetings, the Neurotech Leaders Forum in November 7th and 8th in San Francisco. Or if you're on the East Coast, the Bioelectronic Medicine Forum, which is in April in New York City. We also attend many, if not most, of the conferences and events in the industry, the International Neuromodulation Society meeting, the North American Neuromodulation Society meeting, which will be in Las Vegas in January, as well as a number of other.
Oh, I'm sorry. That one sounded interesting. What was that? The thing in Las Vegas again?
The NANS meeting, now North American Neuromodulation Society has their meeting in January in Las Vegas, and it's a great scientific and clinical meeting where investigators and doctors and engineers who are helping to build new therapies, new neuromodulation therapies, interact, and some great sessions
I see.
take place there.
I see. Now, all those sound pretty interesting. What can I find at the Neurotech Leaders Forum? What would one find there?
Neurotech Leaders Forum is a 2-day conference. It's a investment and management conference. So what you're going to find, hopefully, are investors, major players, med tech manufacturers, and startups, and a place where they can all congregate, share ideas, discuss problems that are confronting the industry or confronting startups, discuss the current economic situation and what's the likelihood of obtaining funding, what are some techniques, what about getting reimbursement, insurance, what are some of the things that are going to be roadblocks, what are some of the things that will help be more successful there, what are some of the new application areas that we should be looking for, what are technology trends, or what are technology roadblocks that we're going to have to watch out for. So those are the types of things we like to discuss. We like to keep it lively. We have some debates sometimes that go on. We have interactive panel discussions, as well as keynote presentations and presentations from startup companies in the space.
I see. That sounds pretty exciting. I'm going to be looking forward to that. All right. So I'll put all the links to where you can find James. I'll add his website and his LinkedIn and his Twitter link to the show notes. And if you're on YouTube, I'll add it to the description. If you're on TikTok, I'll add it to the comments. So James, this was pretty awesome and insightful for me. So thank you for being a guest.
Thank you, Devin. Appreciate it. And please do come join us in San Francisco. If you can make it out in November, we'd love to have you as our guest.
Yeah, sounds pretty exciting. All right, James. So again, thank you for your time and enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay, thank you.